From the moment that Steve donned that metaphorical manager's hat, a decent, if short-lived career crashed headlong into a maelstrom of stress, self-doubt, and awkwardly difficult conversations, challenging everything he thought he knew about successful leadership and how to manage people. Hello, listeners, and welcome. This is Leading with Integrity Leadership Talk, the podcast for first-time managers who are working in tech-driven businesses and teams and who want to be more effective, people-first leaders. Each week, you will learn the crucial strategies, mindsets, and practical tips that successful modern leaders follow to be engaging, ethical, and authentic managers who get the best from their teams. And we'll achieve all of this via weekly conversations with leaders, with leadership experts, entrepreneurs, and business owners, people who have already walked this path and have some amazing insights to share, with an added sprinkling of occasional solo episodes like this one and some group chats where we'll have multiple guests. Haven't done one of those for a while, but it's definitely on my list. My name is David Hatch, and I will be your host. And leadership has always been a passion for me. After a career spent in a series of small businesses during 15 years in the aerospace industry, 5 or 6 of those at the end of that career were in a space startup in the UK, so trying to launch satellites into orbit, very cool stuff. And through all of that experience, I learned that the secret to successful management is in the ability to apply great leadership. And in turn, the secret to great leadership, it's all about your integrity, putting people before profits, and pretty much just not being a dick. Excuse my French. So leaving that career and starting out on my own, today I help new and first-time managers be more effective, more engaging, and more successful as leaders, whilst avoiding the burnout, the stress, the disinterested staff, and all those other nasty problems that tend to crop up around bad leadership. I care about this because making that transition from practitioner, from doer to manager, from doing the work to leading the work is tough. Change is difficult at the best of times, and this transition can be the most difficult many people will face in their career, but it's definitely going to be the most difficult so far. It's also the career stage where you tend to be least likely to get any access to leadership development from your company. So that's who I am and why I do what I do. And one of the ways that I help leaders and new managers is with this podcast, I hope.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Hello again, listeners. Now, if you have listened to the podcast over the last couple of weeks, and episode 50 in particular, then you may remember that in celebration of hitting that 50 episode milestone, and to thank all of my wonderful listeners such as yourselves and the supporters, people who've left the very kind reviews, I'm doing a series of extra episodes. I'm calling it informally the 50th episode celebration mini-series, which is a bit of a mouthful. So this one is the first of those 4 bonus episodes, and it's a new format as well. No guest today, just me, the microphone, and a very large coffee. So today I'm going to tell you 2 short-ish stories, hence the title of this first episode, A Tale of 2 Managers. Now, both of these stories are true. They really happened, and we'll summarize 2 important lessons to take away at the end. But obviously I have changed some of the unimportant details. I've changed the names as well. What do they say on the crime dramas? To protect the identities of those involved, not because of ongoing legal cases, you'll be pleased to know. Story number 1 then is about a brand new first-time manager. Let's call them Manager 1. Actually, that's a bit clinical. Let's call them Steve. Yeah, Steve. As I say, to protect the reputations and the privacy of those involved, I've changed the names and some of the unimportant minor details. Okay, enough faffing. Here we go then. So, meet Steve. Meet Steve, a quiet but capable practitioner, well-educated, respected in his company for his attention to detail, the quality of his work, and his commitment to the business, to his job. Quite often, for example, works overtime, even though he's on a salary and doesn't get paid to do that. But today, Steve's life at work is about to take a sharp turn. After only a little over a year in his job and working for this particular company, Steve is being promoted to manager, which is great. Obviously, he's done well and the bosses have noticed. It is a small business, though, quite small, less than 10 full-time staff. And the team that he's now going to be responsible for is even smaller. But it's on what you might call the front lines of the company. It's customer facing. It's delivery focused. So Steve is pretty eager for this one. He's looking forward to it. He's quietly confident and he's actually a bit excited. He believes that the transition from doer to manager will be seamless and that he's going to ascend to ever greater heights. He thinks it's going to be pretty easy, actually. However, as the curtains rise, the rubber meets the road, the wheat is separated from the chaff, and dare I say it, the proverbial hits the fan, reality soon sets in. Steve's initial confidence wavers pretty damn quickly as the challenges ahead become crystal clear to him. Now, Steve thinks, or likes to think, that he knows a bit about leading and managing. He's had some experience of it outside of work. And to start with, at least, as I said, he was pretty confident that between that and his excellent technical knowledge of the tasks at hand, he's going to be the perfect person for this job. In his mind, he just needs to tell people what needs doing and then make sure they're doing it. It's simple. And he's always got the work done when he was the one doing it and when he was treated that way by his boss. And after all, he is a boss now. So that's just how it would have to be, whether people liked it or not. And there's two particular incidents in this story that illustrate just how far out of his depth he really is. Firstly, a few weeks into his new role, one of his team members just flat out refuses to do as they're told. No matter what Steve tries or says, no matter how much he cajoles, complains, coerces, attempts to reason, the teammate just says, I'm not doing that. It's not my job. And also, it's a stupid idea. So stick it. And they stick to their guns, no matter what he does. So eventually, well, maybe you can guess what happens eventually. Maybe it's happened to you. Maybe you've been there. Eventually, Steve gives up and he just does the task himself. Despite privately agreeing, actually, that it was an unnecessary task and it won't achieve anything, although he would probably have drawn the line before calling it stupid. The fact was the CEO wanted it done. He had told Steve to get it done. Steve knows it's his responsibility to achieve it. The second incident is a few months later. Steve's not really pleased with the overall quality, the quantity, or the productivity of his new team's work. And while he is worrying about this problem and the way it's likely reflecting upon his management skills, the issue then culminates with a quite embarrassing oversight, and that oversight results in a complaint and potential legal consequences. The outcome of all of that is Steve and one of his fellow managers having to write a cap-in-hand apology, a grovelling admission on behalf of the company, plus a distinctly uncomfortable meeting with an external stakeholder. Now, for the first 6 to 12 months of his new role, so I guess the first year, Steve's level of frustration gradually grows. Self-doubt and imposter syndrome become his familiar partners each day. His self-confidence plummets, and his attempts to balance the needs of the team with the demands of the company and his senior leadership lead to quite a few sleepless nights and endless introspection. The weight of responsibility feels overwhelming at times. And it's around this time that a number of new faces are hired into the company. Among them, actually, a senior veteran leader who shares many of the same interests as Steve, both personal and professional, and very much takes him under their wing. Soon, feeling more supported than he has previously, Steve's able to start to learn from some of these experiences instead of obsess about them, as well as getting some of that invaluable experience that's shared by this new mentor that he's found. He begins to recognize some of the key aspects of where he's gone wrong in his journey towards leadership and how he might have handled them differently and how he might have handled that whirlwind of change differently as well. Leading a team requires more than just technical proficiency. It demands a whole new set of skills. Among them is the ability to communicate well, to explain that vision and mission, to apply empathy and caring, to lead by example, and be adaptable to the changing needs of the people you're leading. And Steve had not managed to do any of those things particularly well, and he found himself facing mounting pressure, torn between the pull of his past achievements and the expectations now placed upon him as a manager, despite having no real knowledge, training, or experience as a manager. And that once familiar territory that he was really good at, getting the job done, has given way to these uncharted waters of leadership and management. As the months and years unfold, Steve immerses himself in the day-to-day. He's determined to be better for his team, to embrace the challenges that lie ahead, and he's ready to prove that he is an effective manager and that he should be trusted with that job. He's worried that if he fails at this task again, it could have serious implications for his future career. So he begins to invest his own money in leadership training and online courses. He expands his reading list. He puts thought into alternative ways of managing that are maybe a bit different to how he's always done it before, how he's seen it done before, and how he's always understood it. Steve's next challenge arrives again, alarmingly swiftly. His CEO gets into an argument with a key supplier. That argument quite quickly turns into a legal battle, and that legal battle becomes protracted over several years. And so over that period, the people in Steve's team, and Steve himself really, are under a lot of stress. Tempers are starting to be tested, and everyone's worried about the survival of the business if this legal battle goes the wrong way. And then a few months later, there's another speed bump in the form of a resignation within the team. Again, threatening to fracture that delicate balance and upset the progress that the team has made and that Steve feels he's made in his own role, developing their working processes, improving their performance, building on teamwork, all of these things. And he's thrown back into this world of stress. There's now a recruitment effort on the horizon. It's going to be needed to replace that person who's leaving. And Steve honestly dreads that experience. He's fearful of picking the wrong person, creating a personality clash unwittingly, ending up with a battle of egos or lost productivity, or just upsetting the good dynamic that he felt he had built in the team now. Having to start again from square one, really, with all of the progress that he's made so far in his management journey. And so that weight of responsibility on Steve's shoulders once again starts to feel almost unbearable. Navigating these stormy seas of management helps Steve learn skills like patience, empathy, and resilience. Whilst he hits occasional failures, while he encounters problems, he also learns the importance of building trust and looking out for people. The small team that he works with, they bond over the experiences they have in this environment. And in a way, they all unite, Steve included, against some of those external pressures. It creates a bonding, a team building experience in a natural, unplanned sort of way that often creates the strongest relationships. And not least among those external pressures is the increasingly erratic decision making that they're all starting to perceive, whether it's true or not, I'll leave you to judge, from their senior management. And that's where we will leave the story of Mr. Steve, manager number one. Now, moving on to our second semi-fictional manager, manager two. That doesn't have much of a ring to it either, so I'm going to call this one Bob. This story is a little bit shorter, but you'll see why a bit later. So we join Bob's story as he is being made an interim director. Like Steve, Bob is qualified, committed, and confident. But unlike Steve, he's also pretty experienced when it comes to not just his job, but also management. He's done it before. His company is a high-tech startup. It's recently expanded. He's been with it since it was founded, but up till now, he hasn't been in a explicitly leading role. Although he has had, as I said, some experience in a previous company. Now, Bob's story has a few similarities, but really is quite different to Steve's. He's taking on an existing team that he has previously been a team member and colleague of, whereas Steve was more stepping into a new team and then hiring people into it. Bob has had past leadership experience as a manager, although not as a director, which he's now being promoted to. The team that Bob is taking over has had some difficult experiences of late. They've experienced uncertainty around their role within the company and what's expected of them. On top of that inherent uncertainty that exists in a startup, the nature of the company they're in. They've also had some difficulties with a few managers. There's been issues with others taking credit for their work, punctuality, attendance rates, rightly or wrongly, they've all come up. And generally, the team has lacked direction. So there's really three big challenges there right out of the gate for Bob. Things that Steve certainly didn't face, or at least not to the same extent. Despite not being new at leading, Bob is new at it within this company. So he's facing that adjustment anyway, despite perhaps feeling like he shouldn't have to. Secondly, he also has the added difficulty of having to redefine the relationship between himself and the direct reports, who were his contemporaries only yesterday. And on top of that, the team has had some problems with the management approaches, internal disagreements recently as well, against which Bob himself was protesting, again, only yesterday. So it's a difficult transition here at the best of times, but for Bob, it's certainly not really the best of times or timing. Now, Bob approaches these problems very differently to the way Steve approached his. He begins by sitting his team down in a room together, no one else there, just them. He makes a promise to his small group that he will communicate as openly as possible. He will support them however he can. And he explains that he sees his role as removing obstacles from their path and not to be adding to their stresses. He also tackles the interim question head on. He tells them that until he's told otherwise, he fully intends to do the job as though it will be permanent, which it does in fact become later, although he obviously doesn't know that yet. The startup environment that they're working in, it's fast-paced, it's rapidly changing, but it's also going through something of a plateau at the moment after its initial growth period. There's a lot of focus on revenue because that's going to be the key to unlocking further growth and scaling the company. As in any startup, it's a very familiar story, I'm sure, to a lot of you. And although there are some key sales targets that have been missed, there's also a small number of customers with whom a good relationship is starting to emerge. Now, Bob's new team, feels wrong to call it a new team. The team within which Bob works and now leads is a customer-facing one. And so they have a very important role there in maintaining the service and the satisfaction levels with those very key customers. And they're key particularly because there's so few of them, relatively speaking. Another part of the role of this team is managing key suppliers. So Bob's approach initially is to focus on strengthening teamwork within that small group. In the wider business, he begins to feel his way through some of the office politics that have become annoyingly persistent, or at least from his point of view. Conscious of the recent context for this team, Bob's primary goal is in ensuring his people are receiving the recognition they deserve in the wider business, whilst protecting them from some of the less helpful and blame-driven trends that he has noticed. Over time, Bob is able to build loyalty and trust with the team by following this approach, And he's also gradually building up some trust in the business at large. A year or two pass, and he's also able to successfully expand the team. Things do start to take off a little bit. And while he does that, he's able to maintain that positive team culture, which is, again, something that can be quite difficult when you expand. Eventually, those office politics that I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, take over. The internal culture of the business begins to erupt with animosity. And from Bob's perspective, it's an almost comical contrast, opposites between the positive interactions that he feels lucky to have with the people in his immediate team every day, and then the negative, unpleasant, acrimonious, and rather toxic interactions that he has to witness or sometimes endure from people in the wider company, most notably between certain senior colleagues. Bob tries his best to avoid being drawn into the latter, drawn into the rubbish, the nonsense, the unnecessary negativity, but ultimately it reaches a point of no return, and he hands in his resignation. He's looking now to his next opportunity, to the future of his career. And he makes this move with a fair amount of regret, but having learned much about change management, about leadership, about what he wants to do with the rest of his life. And he does remain grateful for that experience. And that's where we shall leave Bob. But let's look briefly then at the key lessons from these tales of two managers. What can we learn from Steve? What can we learn from Bob? You tell me. Send me a message. Let me know. I'll tell you what I think, the lessons I take from those two stories. Steve's experience teaches us that an I say jump, you say how high approach to leadership doesn't really work in a modern business. Hopefully that's not a surprise to anyone. The key lesson there is that trusted, respected, and empowered teams will deliver better than teams who are treated like school children. Any day of the week, doesn't matter. I'll challenge you to disprove that. Clock watching, that kind of old school approach to leadership, ultimately what you get from that sort of mindset is less hours worked overall, less productivity, less outcomes, worse results, etc. Data from Gallup and elsewhere tells us that less than 25% of employees globally would consider themselves engaged with their work or satisfied with their job. And managers can account for as much as 70% of that difference between any given companies. So what all of this points us to very much is move away from the old school ideas of management, focus on proactive, future-looking leadership, and take a modern approach. To get the best from people, we as managers also need to be leaders. And leaders need to be forward-looking, adaptable, empathetic, and supportive for our rapidly evolving workplaces today. Bob's experiences show us the contrast of what is possible when we do follow that different leadership path. It underlines the lessons that Steve learned, but it also shows us the power of authenticity and honesty for building that most essential commodity for any leader, trust. So that's my two big takeaways from it anyway. If you have others, please do share them. I'm always happy to hear and have a conversation and engage about it. It's, you can tell I'm passionate about these subjects. Now, it's at this point that I'm going to make a small admission. I hope you will forgive the conceit, forgive the slight misdirection. I did say at the beginning that both of those stories were true, and they are. What I didn't tell you, though, is that they are both about the same person. There is no Steve or Bob. They are, in fact, both about the same manager at different stages of his career, and that manager was me. So there we go. It is hard-earned lessons, and that's why I'm able to tell them with such detail and hopefully a bit of humour, but you be the judge of that. Now, I don't know if you found that useful. I hope you don't mind my little white lie at the beginning there. I hope you can also forgive me the slight ego trip of talking about myself for half an hour. But if you did find this episode useful, if you are going through a similar experience right now and you need more help with making a leadership transition in your career, then good news, I have a short course to get you started. You can learn the tactics, the priorities, the behaviors that I employed in my own leadership, that I've drawn from the lessons of my own career journey and becoming a better leader myself. And it will help you to become a more effective manager. The course will take you a few days at most. It's going for a great price. You can get it now for less than $100 or £80 if you're in the UK. And if that sounds good, then there is a link in the episode description. Click on that, enter your details, and I'll be in touch very shortly. That's all from me today. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the podcast. And please do let me have your feedback on the stories I've told today, on this new format of episode, whether you like it or not, whether you prefer the interviews. And join me again next week for another 2 episodes. For Podcast Wednesday next week, I will be interviewing a brilliant sales coach and leader by the name of Mark Hayes. We'll be talking about all kinds of things, business, sales, and leadership related, and the many lessons that he's learned from his career. And then we'll have another bonus episode just like this one coming on Friday next week. And in that one, I'm going to be talking about the perils of being a dictator in the workplace and why that is something you should want to avoid. If you'd like to listen live while I record that one, you can for the first time ever. I'll be running that as a LinkedIn audio event, so you can drop in, drop out, however and whenever you like. The recording day will be Wednesday next week. It'll be midday UK time, so that's BST. If you want to find the details of that, just find my profile on LinkedIn. Again, there'll be a link in the episode description. Go to my list of events and you will find it on there. Awesome. Well, thank you again for listening, for being here. I hope to see you again next week. And in the meantime, you know what I'm going to say, I hope by now. But in the meantime, remember, be a leader, not a boss. Be a Bob, not a Steve. No offense to any Steves out there, obviously.